couldn't go out. But I could hear screams. About 6 roofs upon their heads. What can we do for them? I couldn't do anything.
And if we drop the factual, what we accept is the spectacular, then we get convinced by the spectacular, which that's the way Russia works now, right? And that is the way the United States is beginning to work. It's the spectacular.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations in the Northeast and in points west. Our website is thestruggle.org. I received a Facebook post in my timeline. The writer was disturbed that the mainstream media had ignored the awarding of the Sean McBride Peace Prize to Jeremy Corbyn, head of the British Labour Party. Rather than just share the post or like it, I added these words. It's even more disturbing that Corbyn has not said one word about the sieges in Ghouta, Syria, and that he broke his promise to speak out against the sarin attack of April, once an independent investigation had assigned blame. Corbyn is a rising star in British politics. He at one time was the head of the group Stop the War. But he is purposely blind about Syria, using the false reasoning that any help to Syrians would encourage U.S. military intervention. He only speaks out for negotiations. I want to read to you a recent resolution of RPM, the Revive the Peace Movement Network. It's entitled, Condemn the Assad Regime for Sarin Gas Attacks and the Besieging of Hundreds of Thousands in Syria. It reads, in April, British party leader Jeremy Corbyn and a number of anti-war activists and groups held back from condemning Assad forces for the chemical attacks on Khan Sheikhoun. He and others called for an independent UN investigation. He did insist that, quote, those responsible must be held to account, unquote. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons did conduct an independent investigation and that found that the sarin gas had been used, and the UN's Joint Investigative Mechanism recently released the reports of an independent investigation attributing responsibility for the attack to Assad forces. Outrageously, instead of the UN moving to punish the guilty parties, a Russian veto has ended the UN Joint Investigative Mechanism panel that investigates charges of chemical attacks. We call for this decision to be immediately reversed. We call on all those who held back from condemning Assad forces for the April sarin attack to speak out now. We call on those who doubted Assad responsibility for the over 1,000 dead in the 2013 sarin attack to reevaluate their position. Siege Watch reports that as of this summer, 800,000 remained under siege and bombing in Syria, half in eastern Ghouta. UN relief is routinely and illegally denied. We call for constant attention to this in the left media and pressure to get corporate media to report on the awful situation. We must never give up on Syrians. We deny that solidarity efforts with Syrians make Western intervention more possible. We must support civilian rights and welfare in Syria. 1 year ago, Assad bombardment and siege forced the opposition to evacuate eastern Aleppo. A few days ago, on Twitter, Iran Arab Spring held a live video conference. One man, going by the Twitter handle Mr. Alhamdo, gave a very moving account of life in Aleppo. He is currently in the Aleppo countryside.
Those memories cannot go out of my mind, cannot be forgotten at all. I still live them in my dreams. I still hear the cries of the children who died just exactly beside my building, maybe a day before announcing the agreement. The whole building collapsed. We might be in their place. I couldn't go out. But I could hear screams. About 6 roofs upon their heads. What can we do for them? I couldn't do anything. No one could do anything. They died there in peace. Till now, their cries are in my ears. I cannot forget. Not them, not others' cries. Because in the last days, we lived a lot of such memories and such incidents that cannot be forgotten. Neither now, nor all our life. Because what we could show, what we could speak, is nothing in comparison with what happened. To know what exactly happened in Aleppo, you should have camera in each corner of Aleppo, in each house, under every stone in Aleppo, to know exactly what happened there, to know what people suffered, to know what people felt there. A lot of people separated. I couldn't know what to do with my daughter, with my wife. I don't know if I was guilty to have them with me. I asked them to leave. They refused. I felt that. I don't know if I make the correct thing or not.
A couple of weeks ago, New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman wrote a nauseating bit of flattery of Prince Salman of Saudi Arabia. Some scholars wrote an open letter suggesting that the New York Times suspend Friedman for this bit of propaganda. People at the Coalition to End the U.S.-Saudi Alliance then created a petition calling for that suspension. You can see it and click on the link to go to that petition at the site, saudius.org. Protests against Trump anointing Jerusalem as part of the Jewish superiority state continue. Here's a protest at a sporting event in Ireland. This one is in Gaza, led by the leftist PFLP. Besides protesting Trump, they're protesting his close ally, Crown Prince Salman of Saudi Arabia. In recent years, Jewish Voice for Peace of New Haven has used the Chanukah holiday as an opportunity to speak out against hatred of Muslims and for Palestinian rights. This year, under a theme of light, they added light for Gaza and Puerto Rico.
We want light in Gaza, they've gotta let it shine. We want light in Puerto Rico, they're gonna let it shine. We want light in Virgin Islands, they're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. They say Islam is frightening, we shall not be moved. Solidarity is heightening, we shall not be moved. That's why we're standing in the streets this Hanukkah. We shall be moved. Trump has brought us hate crimes, we shall not be moved. We stand up for your neighbor time, we shall not be moved. That's why we're standing in the streets this Hanukkah. We shall not be moved. They say black lives don't matter, we shall not be moved. But our support won't shatter, we shall not be moved. That's why we're standing in the streets this Hanukkah. We shall not be moved. Stand for justice, Palestine, we shall not be moved. Equal rights for Palestine, we shall not be moved. That's why we're standing in the streets this Hanukkah. We shall not be moved. Refugees are welcome here, we shall not be moved. It's our own leaders we must fear, we shall not be moved. That's why we're standing in the streets this Hanukkah. We shall not be moved. We want lights in Gaza, we shall not be moved. We want lights in Puerto Rico, we shall not be moved. That's why we're standing in the streets this Hanukkah. We shall not be moved.
We hold up this light to signal all that is life-sustaining. We dedicate this beacon of light to all people who are denied that which supports life. To the people of Puerto Rico who struggle under U.S.-controlled colonial occupation, and to the people in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where almost 50% of the population are still without electricity 2 months after Hurricane Maria.
I just want to thank you very much for doing this, standing for justice. I think when I think of Judaism, I think of Tikkun Olam, changing the world. And I think this is exactly what we need to change the world, to stand up for minority rights, to stand up for the rights of the indigenous people in America, to stand up for the rights of the Palestinians, and to stand up against Islamophobia and racism and bigotry and misogyny in every form that we can.
Now more of Timothy Snyder's Mark Shafer lecture for promoting enduring peace. Snyder had been talking about his book on tyranny and the lessons he's learned after decades of studies of the tyrannies of Hitler and Stalin.
So the politics of inevitability is breaking. It's breaking in the US. It's breaking for a number of reasons. The most obvious one is inequality. If you don't think you have a future, it's very hard to believe in a story about how things are obviously getting better. The politics of inevitability, the story of progress, breaks down individual by individual, family by family, Appalachian Valley by Appalachian Valley. The people who won the election for Mr. Trump were people who lived in counties in the Midwest which are in public health crisis and which are in opioid crisis. That is the places in the United States where, not the only places, but places in the United States where the story of progress just doesn't make sense anymore, especially to people who were used to taking it for granted. Now, what happens when an inevitability story breaks down is that an eternity story comes to take its place. An eternity story is not about how the future is always going to be better. It's about how the same thing happens over and over again. The same thing happening over and over again is that the malevolent outsider is attacking the innocent us. That's the story. So the way that the politics of eternity works is that it banishes the future completely. It doesn't talk about how to make a better future. Instead, it talks about making America great again, right? It loops back into the past. It loops back, but it doesn't actually ask what was better about the past. So in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, well, the distribution of American wealth was much more even than it is now. No one's talking about that. Unions were a lot stronger than they are now. No one's talking about that. American public education, at least in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, was the best or close to the best in the world. It's not now. No one's talking about that, right? There are things about making America great or about the decades that people remember that one could actually apply public policy to. That's not what you do in the politics of eternity. You don't do any public policy. What you do instead is you refer to a past in which you think you were relatively better off than someone else. right? So you tell the Making America Great Again is not about actually doing the things that might make America more just and therefore more hopeful. It's about telling some Americans that they're better than other Americans, right? That's the way that it works. Politics, instead of being about a future which is common, is about a present in which Americans are broken up into different clans and are at constant war with each other, right? So, hence references to, the list, just I'll always forget something, but the hateful references to Native Americans, African Americans, immigrants, Muslims, you name it, right? That's not random or baffling. It is part of a policy, which is to tell some Americans that you're better Americans, some Americans that you're worse Americans, and then the politics of eternity will just let you fight it out, fight it out, fight it out, fight it out, until everyone forgets about the future, which, by the way, has already happened, right? I mean, how many people, whether you're Republicans or Democrats, or whatever else you might be, believe that there will be future-oriented public policy? No one believes in that. I mean, people might disagree about whether that's good or bad, but nobody thinks there's actually going to be public policy made in the next 4 years, and there will not. It goes a bit deeper than that. The politics of eternity, in its extreme variant, takes the pain that brought it about and makes that pain worse. So consider this hypothetically. Consider hypothetically that the main problem in your country was inequality. And consider hypothetically that there's a group of people who suffer in public health crisis. So what policies would you make? Well, would you take away their health care? And would you push tax regression so that wealth is even more concentrated in the top? It's not even 1%, actually, it's the top 0.01%. Would you push a tax plan which further concentrates wealth? Yes, you would. Because the idea is to generate pain. Because the pain that you generate with public policy then becomes the energy that you divert, the energy that you use to keep one set of people fighting with another set of people. That's how the politics of eternity works. Insofar as there is public policy, it's meant to hurt your supporters, deliberately to hurt your supporters, which, that's pretty much where we are. The policy that is available, either it won't happen, in which case people can say government can't do anything, or if it does happen, it will administer pain, and that pain then becomes the fuel for the story. Okay, politics of responsibility. This is the hopeful part. Politics of responsibility has to do with understanding where we are in history, what is actually possible, and taking responsibility for trying to make certain things happen. So the bulk of the book is about the kind of politics of responsibility, what one can actually do. And many of you are doing these things, so just please take these as my concepts and my encouragement. Lesson number 9 is be kind to the language. Lesson number 10 is believe in truth. Lesson number 11 is investigate. This business of truth is extremely important. Okay, I talked earlier about how freedom is awkward. One thing which is always just a little bit awkward for me is to stand up as a historian and say, believe in truth, because it's like a dentist standing up and saying oral hygiene is really important. It's right down the middle of what we do, but it's so central and so axiomatic that's just a little tiny bit embarrassing. But honestly, I'm not embarrassed to talk about it, because without the truth, without the pursuit of the truth, pretty much every institution that we take for granted becomes impossible. It's not that we have to agree about what the truth is. That's different. We just have to agree that it's there. If we don't think there's any truth, if we really reach the point where I just say, well, Stanley has his thing and I've got my thing and it doesn't really matter who's right. When you reach that point, civil society is impossible. Because you cannot cooperate with people unless you trust them, and you can't trust them unless there's some world in which you trust them, some real world. The rule of law is impossible. The rule of law depends on findings of fact. Any of you out there who are thinking about the Mueller thing, right, which I'm happy to talk about, the rule of law depends on findings of fact. If we get to a place where the FBI has its opinion and the Supreme Court justice has his opinion, but on the other hand, I've got my opinion, if we get to that place, the rule of law is impossible. If we get to the place where we just all think all that matters is our subjective opinions, and we're not going to look and try to figure things out, we will then be lonely. Because what are we going to talk to? And of course, we've already progressed a very long way in this direction. How can we talk to each other? We will all be lonely, and we will all therefore be powerless. And what wins in this situation, and this is not my speculating, this is what the 21st century looks like, what wins in that situation is spectacle. Fact is our only defense against spectacle. Money will always have the spectacle. There are people who can make a better spectacle. I mean, much as I hope you're enjoying this, there are better spectacles than listening to some guy talk in front of a microwave, and whatever it is, a microphone, whatever this thing is. There are better spectacles than that, and there are better unintentional jokes than that. There's always a bigger spectacle, right? There's always something that can be more spectacular. And if we drop the factual, what we accept that's a spectacular, then we get convinced by the spectacular, which that's the way Russia works now, right? And that is the way the United States is beginning to work. It's the spectacular, and it's the deep pockets which will always have the better spectacle. So if you give up on the facts, you're basically saying, oligarchy, come to us. Please, that's what we want. We want the oligarchy. Number 12, make eye contact and small talk. So this is maybe the one which has gotten the most response, the eye contact and the small talk. And since I'm here, I'm gonna quote scripture. Watch this. 1 Corinthians, right, 13, the through a glass darkly quotation, right? That's what this is all about. You know as you are known, right? If you don't talk to other people, if you don't let them know you, then you only know in part. You only know the whole if you see how other people see you. And you can't do that over the goddamn internet, right? It just cannot be done. It doesn't happen. No one on Facebook ever writes back, right? You have convinced me with your thoroughly rational arguments, right? Of the trillions of Facebook posts, that one has never actually been written, right? The only way to know yourself is to catch a glimpse of yourself in someone else's eyes. And that can only be done in person, right? So to make eye contact and small talk is in the book because I think it's very important for us to have the conversations, even if we don't persuade other people, not because it's not about the instant gratification. It's not about finding that person who voted a different way than we did and immediately convincing them. Because that, of course, never happens. And that's not what it's about, right? Think about the last time you argued with the person you're closest to. Did you convince them in one conversation? No. So why should it happen with a stranger in Mississippi? It's not going to. The important thing is establishing that you're a human being, which cannot be done over the internet. And the important thing also is seeing yourself through their eyes, because only when you see yourself through their eyes can you see what you might be right about and might be wrong about, because often the other person is right about something. You never see that unless you see yourself the way that they see you. Okay, I really like 1 Corinthians 13, so I'll just move on now. But thank you for the opportunity to do 1 Corinthians 13. I appreciate that. Okay. Number 13 is related. Practice corporeal politics. You all know about this because you're here. Getting your body out from the house, out from the computer, in among other bodies, what you're doing now. Number 14, establish a private life. Also very similar, but what I mean by that is don't shed everything onto the internet. Keep some part of you, which is just you. Number 15, contribute to good causes, which can mean time and energy. It can also mean money. A very easy fix is just to and I'm sure a number of you have done this, but just set a bunch of things to autopay. And then no matter how bad of a day you're having, you're helping a bunch of other good people do good things, right? Do that with newspapers too, please. It makes such a difference. Then number 16, learn from peers in other countries. Okay, what comes next? Where are we heading? Where do I think we're going? So I'll just say a few things here. We'll talk about it more. But I think elections, right? Very important. Some elections can't afford to lose. Elections necessary but not sufficient. Gotta win them, but that's not enough. It can't depend entirely on a political party. This is a very long-term transformation that we're facing one way or another. The rule of law, extremely important as a principle. Easy to let go. So with the Mueller thing, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, the main thing that signifies for me is the rule of law. findings of fact and the application of the rule of law. That's what's holding the United States together at this point. It's not the checks and balances, which, sorry to say, are not really working, but the thing that we're hanging on to by our teeth or our fingernails or whatever, like desperate anatomical metaphor you prefer, is the rule of law. That's the thing that we've still got. Thank you. Thank you. And I didn't even tell you about my high school football knee injury, which which is fictional. Okay, so rule of law. Where we already are, and I've talked about this before, but where we already are is the production of fiction, the endless production of fiction. So on the one side, you feel outraged, right? Every few days, every few minutes, every few hours, you feel outraged. Okay, I finally got you nodding. All right, you guys haven't been big nodders so far, but thank you for nodding at the outrage, right? So you feel outraged, but for every time you feel outraged, someone else feels triumph. And that's the way the dialectic works, the outrage versus the triumph versus the outrage versus the triumph. And that's where the energy goes and where it's meant to go. Some Americans versus other Americans, as opposed to people thinking about their interests and what public policy they should have, or people thinking about what public policy they want or how to cooperate. We're meant to be outraged. That's part of how it's supposed to work. And the way that collapses everything into the present, that makes it very hard to think about the future, which is why I started by affirming the climate change and by affirming the nuclear weapons, because there are these long-term things that we can't give up on. We can't give up on those things. We have to be thinking about the future. If we drop down into the present and we just fight the fight, then we're going to lose. Then we lose, because that's the politics of eternity. You get swept into this thing, into this cycle, and you just go round and round and round again. You get swept into the news cycle, basically. It's like the news cycle is a centrifuge or something, and you just get whipped around with it over and over and over and over and over. And you're protesting, you've got your back against the wall in that centrifuge, and you're like pushing your fingers out away from the centrifuge. That's not enough. We have to try to stay out of that.
And to close, some fantastic lighting from last year's display in Dyker Heights, Brooklyn. That's our program for today. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.